Stop the projector if you still want your retirement supplement, Conrad warned. Then Slate placed 3 sealed documents on the stage and said, "You can cut the power, but you cannot erase what this room has seen." As the hidden reel flickered, one forgotten name returned to the screen. The glass inspection loop struck the floor before Conrad Fenwick finished his warning, scattering bright shards beneath Alden Pike's shoes. Stop that projector if you still want your retirement supplement. The archival projector rattled at 11:47 p.m., its sprockets drawing a brittle strip of 16 millimeters film through the gate, while Alden's breath came sharp with the smell of hot dust, machine oil, and bitter coffee left untouched for 3 hours. Conrad reached toward the red cutoff switch, his cuff brushing the wall, while the first pale image trembled across the screen below. The same theater, 42 years earlier, its corridor clouded with smoke and its exit lamps barely alive. "Turn it off." Alden kept one hand on the upper reel and the other against the projector housing, feeling each vibration climb through his fingers. Beyond the small square window, 100 bikers sat among rows of red velvet seats, their weathered leather jackets still wet from freezing rain and their boots leaving gray slush beneath brass aisle lights polished for the reopening gala. None of them spoke, none moved toward the stage, and none looked at Conrad. They watched the screen. Everett Slate, Brogan sat in the center row, broad shoulders rigid, a silver scar visible beneath his right eye whenever the film flashed white. Alden had seen men arrive angry before. This was different. The silence felt measured. Conrad stepped closer and lowered his voice, reminding Alden that the retirement supplement was worth $28,400, that one unauthorized screening could erase it, and that at 74 years old he would not find another projection booth willing to hire him. The words carried the dry taste of copper into Alden's mouth. "You signed the transfer," Conrad said. "Everything in this room belongs to the foundation." Alden glanced at the dented silver can resting beside the rewinder. Red wax pencil crossed the lid in 2 hard words: "Never show." The can had been hidden behind a loose panel for more than 4 decades. Yet Conrad reacted to it before Alden said a word about the frames inside. That was the first thing that did not fit. The second was the storage slip beneath the lining, signed by Conrad's mother and naming Alden as lawful custodian until provenance could be verified. The third was the audience. 100 bikers had entered the Ravenport Lyric without tickets, without demands, and without removing their soaked jackets. They had asked for only 2 things: shelter from the ice and the truth about Silas Pembroke. Alden tightened his grip as the film jumped. On screen, a younger version of the theater appeared beneath emergency lighting. A man in a leather vest crossed the frame, turned toward a dark hallway, and raised one arm as if directing unseen people toward safety. Slate leaned forward. Conrad saw it too. His fingers closed around the cutoff switch. Last warning. Alden looked down at the white projection gloves tucked beside the machine, then at the unsigned retirement supplement agreement Conrad had placed on the table like a price tag. 42 years of silence pressed harder than the threat beside him. He heard the reel spin, smelled the old acetate warming, and remembered a man who had once accepted blame so Alden could keep his job. Then Conrad reached for the switch. Alden laid his palm across the switch plate before Conrad could touch it. For 1 second, the projector, the rain, and the 100 men below seemed to hold the same breath. Alden did not raise his voice. You already knew what was on this reel. Conrad's face changed. Not much. Enough. On the screen, Silas Pembroke stepped deeper into the smoke, and every biker in the theater remained seated, waiting for the moment history had refused to show them. 40 minutes earlier, the Ravenport Lyric had looked less like a theater than a polished promise no one was allowed to touch. Marble floors without a footprint, brass rails rubbed bright enough to reflect the chandelier light, white-jacketed attendants carrying silver trays of sparkling water past donors in dark suits, and women wrapped in pale winter coats. Lydia Fenwick moved through them with a tablet pressed to her chest, correcting the angle of a velvet rope and reminding staff that the midnight reopening would commemorate the emergency that had occurred 42 years earlier. Outside, sleet had only begun to glaze the front steps. High above the lobby, Alden Pike, the Lyric's last licensed film Projectionist, packed 51 years into 3 cardboard boxes. A chipped coffee mug, 2 screwdrivers, a brass focus gauge, 6 pairs of white gloves, and a photograph of his late wife beside the old carbon arc machine. After midnight, the booth would be converted into a digital control room. A small camera above the balcony and a second inside the projection booth were already carrying the rehearsal to 6 trustees unable to travel through the storm. Then the motorcycles arrived. The first engine rolled beneath the marquee at 10:56 p.m., while sleet still beaded on the pavement instead of freezing solid. More followed in disciplined intervals until the glasses on Lydia's reception table began to tremble against their silver tray. Guests turned toward the tall front windows as headlights spread across the frozen street, cutting through sleet in white bars. By 11:05 p.m., motorcycles filled the curb and the adjacent municipal lot, leaving the marquee entrance and fire lane clear. Their jackets were black, brown, and weathered gray, their shoulders heavy with rain, their boots marked by road salt and dark mud that looked almost offensive against the cream marble. No one rushed the doors. No one shouted. Lydia ordered the attendants to lock them outside. Alden saw the oldest rider first, a narrow man with a white beard who leaned against his motorcycle while his left hand shook from the cold. And before Lydia could repeat herself, Alden crossed the lobby and released the side entrance. Wet air poured in with the smell of gasoline, leather, ice, and distant chimney smoke, replacing the theater's careful perfume of waxed wood and citrus polish. "They're not on the guest list," Lydia said. Alden held the door open. "Neither is the weather." After the security chief logged the group and completed a quick prohibited items check, the riders entered in pairs, wiping their boots where they could as gray water spread across the spotless floor. Guests drew back toward the velvet ropes, staring at scarred faces and soaked sleeves, while the bikers lowered their voices, removed their gloves, and followed every direction Alden gave them. He led them away from the gala tables and into the balcony foyer, where restored gold trim ended beside radiators that still clanked like old pipes in a boarding house. From a storage closet, Alden carried out 12 folded seat covers and handed them to the men whose hands looked stiffest. The contrast was almost absurd. Crystal light above them, road grime beneath them, polished brass at their elbows, and rainwater darkening the leather across their backs. Yet the bikers behaved with more restraint than the donors below. Everett Slate Brogan entered last. He was 63, broad through the chest, with a silver scar beneath his right eye and a black coat carrying enough frozen water to darken the carpet in slow drops. He did not look at the chandelier, the marble, or Lydia's security staff. He looked only at Alden. "We came about Silas Pembroke," Slate said. Alden's fingers tightened around the final folded cover. Lydia stepped between them and asked whether Silas had filed a claim against the theater, whether the men expected compensation, and whether she needed to contact counsel before the roads closed completely. Slate ignored each question. His gaze remained on Alden, calm and patient in a way that felt heavier than anger. "He said something was left here," Slate said. Alden tasted old coffee at the back of his throat, though he had not taken a sip since 8. "Silas has been gone for 11 years. "I know." Slate reached into his jacket slowly and removed a yellowed ticket stub protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. The printed date was February 17th, 1984. On the back, written in faded pencil, was one name: Alden Pike. The lobby clock clicked to 11:14. Below them, Lydia's guests resumed their careful conversation, pretending not to watch. Slate held out the ticket, but did not force Alden to take it. Silas said that if the Lyric ever reopened on a night this cold, you would know where to look. Outside, another sheet of ice slid from the marquee and shattered across the empty sidewalk. Alden stared at the faded handwriting, then toward the projection booth door at the end of the balcony corridor. For 42 years, one section of that room had remained sealed behind a warped wooden panel. Tonight, the panel was standing open. Alden crossed the balcony corridor at 11:16 p.m., carrying the yellowed ticket between 2 fingers while Slate followed 3 steps behind. The hallway narrowed beyond the restored gold molding, leaving the warm glow of the gala for bare plaster, exposed conduit, and a row of utility bulbs that hummed above the old projection booth door. Below them, crystal glasses touched in careful celebration. Above them, freezing rain struck the roof like thrown gravel. The booth smelled of machine oil, dry paper, hot metal, and the faint vinegar odor of aging film. Alden set the ticket beside his focus gauge, then moved toward the warped panel behind the storage shelves. It had stood closed since the winter of 1984, painted over twice, hidden behind inventory boxes. No one had bothered to move until the renovation crew loosened its lower hinge that afternoon. Now a black opening waited behind it. Slate remained near the doorway. "You knew this was here?" Alden asked. Silas knew something was left behind. "That is not the same answer. It is the only one he gave us." Alden reached into the cavity and felt cold metal beneath 42 years of dust. The object resisted, caught against a nail, then slid free with a scraping sound that sent gray flakes across the newly refinished floor. It was a round silver film can, 12 inches wide, dented near the latch and darkened by an old burn along one edge. Across the lid, written in thick red wax pencil, were 2 words, "Never show." For several seconds, Alden did not breathe. The letters were familiar. The pressure of the strokes was familiar. Even the hook tail beneath the final W carried the memory of a hand he had watched sign paychecks, inspection forms, and dismissal notices. Slate stepped closer, but did not touch the can. "Who's writing?" Alden wiped dust from the lid with his sleeve. Someone who spent his life deciding which version of the truth people were allowed to see. He opened the latch. Inside lay a magnetic sound 16mm workprint wrapped in brittle black paper, its leader cut and rejoined with a narrow strip of yellowing tape. The edge code dated the stock to 1984, while the handwritten laboratory number matched the week following the emergency. Alden lifted the first few inches toward the booth light and saw 4 tiny frames. A corridor, a pale emergency lamp, a man in a leather vest turning toward the camera. His thumb stopped. "Silas." The booth door opened before Slate could speak. Conrad Fenwick entered with Lydia behind him, bringing the clean scent of cedar cologne and cold marble into the room's heavier air. Conrad's expression held for half a second, then tightened when he saw the can. "Put that down." Alden lowered the strip carefully. "You recognize it." Conrad glanced at Lydia, then at Slate. "I recognize unauthorized archive material being handled without supervision." "You recognized that before I told you what the frames showed. Everything found in this building belongs to the Foundation." "Then why was it hidden in a wall?" Lydia stepped between them, her tablet bright against the dim booth. She said the renovation had uncovered dozens of unlisted objects, that preservation rules required immediate transfer, and that no one could verify whether the film was authentic. Her voice was smooth enough for the donors below. Her eyes were not. Conrad reached for the can. Alden placed one hand over the lid. For 51 years, he had obeyed management instructions, fire codes, screening schedules, donor requests, and every quiet correction made by men who never climbed the stairs to see how a projector actually worked. This time, he did not move. Conrad's gaze hardened. "Your retirement agreement isn't signed." The words landed softly. They carried more weight than a threat shouted across the room. Slate shifted once, the leather at his shoulder creaking, but he stayed beside the door. He did not block Conrad. He did not raise his voice. He watched Alden decide whether the silver can was worth $28,400. In the last years of his security, Alden lifted the paper lining from beneath the reel. A folded storage slip lay against the bottom, browned at the edges but protected from damp. The signature at the bottom belonged to Eleanor Fenwick, then the theater's co-owner and corporate secretary. The line above it named Alden Pike as lawful custodian until provenance and ownership were formally reviewed. Conrad's face lost its practiced calm. Lydia leaned closer. Alden read the date twice. February 22nd, 1984. 5 days after the emergency, now commemorated on the bronze plaque downstairs. "This was never transferred," Alden said. Conrad extended his hand. "It is being transferred now." Alden looked at the dented can, the polished cuff beside it, and the black road-worn glove resting at Slate's side. One man had arrived wrapped in authority. The other had arrived carrying only a ticket. "No," Alden said. Conrad's jaw tightened. "You do not understand what is on that film." Alden met his eyes. "Then tell me how you do." Silence filled the booth, broken only by the distant clink of champagne glasses and the ice scraping against the roof. Slate finally stepped forward. "We are not here to protect Silas from that reel," he said. "We are here to make sure no one hides him inside it again." The balcony radiators knocked behind the wall, while Lydia guided the remaining donors toward the main floor, assuring them that the delay involved a routine archive review. Below, waiters replaced wet glasses with dry ones, adjusted white linen, and moved around the gray boot prints as if the marks were temporary flaws in a perfect photograph. Above, Alden carried the silver can through a corridor where the plaster had cracked beneath gold trim no guest was meant to inspect. Slate walked beside him without speaking. Conrad followed close enough for Alden to hear the measured rhythm of his shoes. At 11:23 p.m., Alden placed the reel on the rewind bench beneath a green-shaded work lamp. The metal can looked crude against the restored brass fittings, its burned edge dark beside the fresh cream paint, its red warning brighter than every polished sign downstairs. He unfolded the storage slip again. Eleanor Fenwick's signature had faded to brown, but the instruction remained clear. Material held by Alden Pike pending verification of origin, custody, and public record. "That does not authorize exhibition," Conrad said. "It authorizes preservation." Alden examined the leader beneath a magnifying lens. Preservation begins with knowing what was preserved. After the roads closed, Lydia had security escort the riders from the balcony foyer into the rear and center rows of the main auditorium, where Alden could see them clearly through the booth window. Their jackets looked almost black beneath the chandelier glow, and the scars on their faces seemed harsher against the theater's soft gold walls. Yet they sat with their hands visible, voices low, and back straight. On the main floor, several donors whispered behind crystal glasses. One laughed too loudly. "Nobody can answer." Slate removed the ticket from its sleeve and laid it beside the reel. "Silas kept that ticket for 31 years, Slate said. "After he died, I kept it for 11 more. Alden stared at his own name on the back. "Why?" He said it belonged to the man who stayed. Conrad gave a quiet, dismissive breath. "The official report says Pembroke damaged an exit door, interfered with staff, and created panic during an electrical failure." Slate looked at him. The official report was written after the smoke cleared, and signed by witnesses. Witnesses whose names came from your father's office. The projector booth seemed to contract around them. Below, the lobby remained bright and ceremonial, with a bronze plaque beneath a spotlight honoring Arthur Fenwick for his leadership during the February 1984 emergency. Above, the air tasted of vinegar, dust, and cold iron. One history had been polished. The other had been sealed in a wall. Alden threaded several feet of film across the inspection table, turning the hand crank slowly. Tiny frames passed beneath the lens, a crowded corridor, a failed exit lamp, Silas raising one arm, two bikers guiding adults toward the side passage. Then Alden saw a younger version of himself near the projection room stairs, carrying a cable reel that should never have left the booth. His hand stopped. Lydia leaned closer. "Is that you?" Alden covered the frame with his palm. "The power failed in the East Hall," he said. "Management ordered me to protect the equipment and remain upstairs." "Did you?" Conrad asked. Alden looked toward the bronze plaque visible through the booth glass. "Not exactly." He explained only what the public record already claimed. Smoke in the corridor, a blocked side exit, confusion among the adult patrons, and Silas breaking a metal bar from one door. He did not explain why the exit had been sealed. He did not say who had restored the emergency lights. He did not say why Silas accepted responsibility when Arthur Fenwick arrived. Slate watched him with the patience of someone who had waited years for a sentence to finish. Conrad placed Alden's and signed retirement agreement beside the reel. The paper was clean, heavy, and perfectly aligned. "Full supplement," he said. $28,400, medical coverage, and no questions about tonight. Hand over the can. Alden's fingers began to tremble as he lifted the reel. The weight was not great, but age had turned simple movements into negotiations between bone and will. Slate stepped forward. Alden stiffened, expecting him to take it. Instead, Slate placed both hands beneath the metal can, supporting its base while leaving Alden's fingers around the rim. "Your choice," he said. "Not ours." Alden lowered the reel onto the spindle. As the leader uncoiled, the yellowed splice caught the lamp. 2 diagonal cuts, a narrow strip of tape, 3 tiny grease pencil marks beside the frame line. Alden recognized the repair immediately because he had made it himself at 2:14 a.m. on February 22, 1984. His throat tightened. The official story said the film had never existed. Yet his own hands had repaired it after everyone else had gone. Slate saw recognition cross his face. "Silas told us you would remember the cut." Alden looked at the retirement supplement agreement, then at the ticket, then at the image of his younger self, standing where no obedient projectionist should have been. "I did not hide this reel because Silas was afraid of what it showed," he said. Conrad's expression hardened. Alden touched the old splice with one white-gloved finger. "I hid it because he took the blame that let me keep my job, my home, and the woman I loved." At 11:31 p.m., Alden pulled a folding chair beneath the work lamp and sat with both hands resting beside the reel. Conrad remained standing, his retirement agreement aligned with the edge of the bench, while Lydia watched the bikers below through the booth window. The theater glittered beneath them. The truth waited in dust. Alden began with the power failure. On February 17, 1984, the East Corridor lights went dark during a private late-night screening. Then the emergency system failed 6 minutes later. Smoke from an overheated electrical cabinet spread beneath the balcony, and 212 adult patrons moved toward exits that had not been tested under a full load since autumn. Arthur Fenwick ordered Alden to remain in the booth. He said the projectors cost more than the people's tickets, Alden recalled. Conrad's mouth tightened. Lydia looked away. Alden continued. From the booth window, he had seen the aisle lights disappear one row at a time, heard shoes striking the floor, and watched staff members wave flashlights without any clear direction. The east exit should have opened into an alley, but a temporary display frame had shifted against the panic bar and jammed the door when the crowd pressed toward it. It looked elegant from the lobby. In the smoke, it became a lock. Silas Pembroke had been seated near the rear with 7 riders. When the lights failed, he did not move toward the front entrance with the crowd. He climbed onto his seat, counted the working aisle lamps, and sent 2 bikers toward the side stairs. Then he began directing people in groups of 12. Slate lowered his eyes. He had heard fragments before, never the full sequence. Alden had broken his orders within 4 minutes. He disconnected a portable power cable from the secondary projector, dragged 70 feet of it down the service stairs, and fed electricity to 3 emergency lamps along the East Hall. The cable crossed wet carpet, brass trim, and a marble landing built to impress donors who would never see the building in darkness. Silas met him at the blocked door. He asked whether the lights would hold. Alden said, "I told them they might last 10 minutes. Slate's voice was quiet. "What did he say?" "Then we do it in 9. The reel shifted slightly beneath the lamp as the building creaked in the storm. Downstairs, white tablecloths remained smooth beneath silver trays. Upstairs, Alden described how Silas wrapped his jacket around the shifted display frame, pulled one mounting bracket loose, and cleared the panic bar enough for the first group to pass. The bikers formed a line between broken glass and frightened patrons. They used their own coats to cover sharp edges. They counted each person aloud. No one pushed. No one was left alone. Arthur arrived after the corridor had nearly cleared. He saw the ruined door, the cable taken from the projector system, and a camera operator from the theater's promotional team still filming near the stairs. Arthur ordered the camera stopped, but the operator lowered the rig to his hip and kept it running as he followed them toward the manager's office. Then he asked who had damaged the exit. "I did," Alden told them. Silas answered first. Conrad stepped closer. "The report says Pembroke admitted responsibility." "He did," Alden replied. The confession was real. The story your family built around it was not. Lydia's tablet dimmed in her hand. Below, the bronze plaque reflected chandelier light beneath Arthur Fenwick's engraved name. It said he had organized the evacuation, restored order, and protected the public through decisive leadership. Every word had been polished each morning for 42 years. None belonged to him. Alden explained what happened after the last patron reached the alley. Arthur called him into the manager's office and placed a termination form on the desk. Removing equipment from the booth, bypassing electrical procedure, and abandoning assigned duty were all grounds for dismissal. Alden's wife, Margaret, had been recovering from a factory accident for 7 months. His insurance covered her physical therapy only while he remained employed. Silas saw the form. He asked Arthur what would happen if the damage had been caused entirely by an outsider. Arthur understood immediately. Silas signed a statement saying he forced the door, interfered with staff, and ordered me to move the cable. Alden said. He made me look like a frightened employee following instructions. Slate's jaw tightened. Conrad said nothing. Lydia finally asked, "Why would he do that for you?" Alden stared at the old ticket beside the reel. Because the winter before, I had opened this same side door when his riders were stranded. Because he had met Margaret and understood what my insurance meant. Because he remembered a kindness I had already forgotten. The camera operator hid the exposed 16mm reel and its separate sound tape, then took both to a local television lab. 4 nights later, he returned with a magnetic sound workprint. Arthur marked the can never show and ordered it destroyed, but Eleanor Fenwick signed the custody slip, removed the print from his office, and placed it in Alden's care. At 2:14 a.m. on February 22, 1984, Alden repaired the damaged splice and sealed the can behind the warp panel. Silas never asked me to clear his name, Alden said. He never even returned to this booth. Slate reached into his coat and placed one more object beside the ticket. A folded note written in Silas's hand 11 years earlier. Alden opened it slowly. The message contained only one sentence. Let the old man choose when the lights come on. Alden read it twice, then looked through the booth glass at the 100 riders sitting beneath the theater's perfect gold ceiling. He waited all that time, Lydia whispered. Slate shook his head. No, he trusted him all that time. At 11:38 p.m., Conrad placed a fountain pen across the unsigned retirement agreement and turned the document toward Alden. The black ink gleamed beneath the green work lamp, the paper thick and clean, the promised medical coverage printed in careful clauses beneath the foundation seal. Beside it sat the dented film can, stained by smoke, marked in red wax, and carrying 42 years no contract could make orderly. Sign this, Conrad said. Transfer the reel, leave tonight with every benefit intact, and let trained archivists decide what deserves to become public. Lydia stood between the booth window and the projection bench, listening to freezing rain scratch across the glass. Downstairs, attendants had dimmed the chandeliers for the delayed presentation, leaving the theater washed in warm amber while 100 black leather jackets filled the velvet seats like shadows that had learned patience. Alden looked at the pen. He could almost taste the soup he would buy on cold mornings, the medicine he would not have to divide into smaller doses, the rent checks that would stop frightening him. Then he looked at Silas's note. You're asking me to sell a choice he gave me for free. Conrad's expression remained controlled. I am asking you not to destroy a restoration that cost $14 million. The marble? Alden asked. The gold leaf? The plaque downstairs? The staff? The grants? The future of this building? A future built around a false past. Lydia stepped closer. Her tablet showed 12 missed calls from trustees, 2 warnings about road closures, and a live countdown to the reopening program. The screen was spotless. Her thumb was trembling. Alden, she said, people who had nothing to do with 1984 could lose their jobs if this becomes a scandal tonight. The words reached him because they were not entirely wrong. Truth could repair a name and still damage innocent lives. It could remove a lie from a wall and leave workers standing beneath the dust. Alden studied the reel's outer edge, then the custody slip, then the rows below where older bikers sat with wet boots carefully tucked beneath their seats, to avoid staining the restored carpet. "I will not call it a scandal," he said. "I will call it verification." Conrad pushed the pen closer. "You do not have exhibition rights." Alden unfolded Eleanor Fenwick's slip and tapped the final line. "The custodian may undertake reasonable inspection necessary to establish provenance, integrity, and historical relevance." Lydia photographed the custody slip and transmitted it to Foundation Council. Her tablet chimed less than a minute later. She read the response twice. "Pending emergency review, the custodian may conduct one supervised evidentiary screening in the secured auditorium. The weather emergency and the presence of sheltered occupants do not invalidate the review." Alden folded the message beside Eleanor's custody slip. "Then your own counsel has authorized the screening." "Not before an audience. The audience contains witnesses connected to the material. They are not witnesses. Most were not there." Slate, still beside the doorway, answered without heat. 7 were. Conrad turned. In the center section below, 7 bikers had moved into the front row. Their hair was white or nearly gone, their shoulders rounded by age, their scars softened by time. One rider, who had arrived in the support van, kept a portable oxygen concentrator beside his seat. Another leaned on a cane polished smooth at the handle. They had entered the theater looking like men the gala staff wanted hidden from photographs. Now, they were the only living people in the building who had walked through the East Corridor that night. Lydia looked down at them, then at the bronze plaque glowing alone beneath its dedicated spotlight. "You brought sworn statements?" she asked. Slate reached inside his coat and removed a flat document envelope sealed against the rain. 7 statements. Copies. Delivered to council at 10:40. Conrad's gaze sharpened. "You planned this. We prepared for someone to refuse the truth." Alden stood. His knees protested, his left hand shook, and the room tilted for half a breath, but he remained upright. He placed the retirement agreement inside one of his cardboard boxes without signing it. Then he lifted the reel. The metal slipped against his glove. Slate stepped in, supporting the bottom with both hands, carrying half the weight without taking control. Together they moved toward the projector. Behind them, Conrad told Lydia to clear the theater, shut down the event, and remove every rider from the property. Lydia looked through the glass at the ice sealing the street, at donors stranded beneath chandeliers, at scarred men sitting more quietly than the people judging them. "The roads are closed," she said. "Then call security." "For what?" Conrad did not answer. Alden slid the yellowed ticket back across the bench. Slate returned it to its clear sleeve and tucked it inside his coat. Alden checked the perforations, measured the shrinkage, replaced the brittle splice, and lowered the archival projector's take-up tension. Only after the leader ran cleanly by hand did he mount the 16mm work print and secure it to the take-up reel. Each movement was practiced, exact, almost ceremonial. White gloves touched black film. Old steel turned beneath restored gold. At 11:44 p.m., he closed the projector housing. "Once it begins," Conrad said, "you cannot place the truth back in that can." Alden switched on the lamp. A hard square of white light struck the screen below, washing over red velvet, polished brass, and 100 waiting faces. "That," Alden said, "is why Silas left it with a projectionist." He pressed the start button. The gears engaged. The reel began to turn. The first image shuddered across the screen at 11:45 p.m., faded nearly white at the edges, then settled into the East Corridor as it had looked 42 winters earlier. Red carpet ran beneath weak emergency lamps. Smoke curled along the ceiling, and frightened adults pressed toward a doorway decorated with polished metalwork that had been installed to impress donors. Tonight, the same corridor gleamed beyond the auditorium doors. On screen, it became a trap. Alden adjusted the focus until every grain sharpened. The younger Silas Pembroke entered from the left side of the frame, broad-shouldered beneath a dark leather vest, his hair wet from sleet and one cheek already marked by the scar Slate remembered. He climbed onto the base of a wall sconce, raised both hands, and divided the crowd into smaller groups, while 7 bikers spread through the corridor without waiting for permission. No one on the film could hear the future calling them disorderly. The magnetic soundtrack hissed, popped, then delivered Silas's voice through the restored speakers. 12 at a time. Keep the center clear. Nobody moves alone. 7 elderly bikers in the front row sat straighter. One pressed both hands around the head of his cane. Another stared at his younger body on the screen as it carried a woman in an evening coat away from the blocked door. Behind them, donors lowered their crystal glasses. The theater had prepared engraved programs, sparkling water, and a speech about Arthur Fenwick's courage. Instead, it gave him Silas counting strangers. The film jumped. Alden corrected the tension before the splice reached the gate, his white gloves moving over black machinery while hot dust and acetate filled the booth. Below, the footage showed a younger Alden dragging the power cable down the service stairs, slipping once on wet carpet, then connecting 3 emergency lamps while Silas held the failing door open with a shoulder. The soundtrack captured Arthur Fenwick's voice from somewhere behind the camera. "Stop filming. That is an order." The camera continued. Lydia stood near the booth window with one hand over her mouth. Through the glass, she could see the bronze plaque in the lobby beneath its private spotlight, every engraved line contradicted by the images now 20 feet high. Conrad remained behind Alden, silent until the film showed Arthur entering the East Hall after the final group had already crossed into the alley. Then his calm broke. "The angle proves nothing," he said. "It does not show who made the decisions before the camera arrived." Slate looked back from the center row. "It shows who was still working when your father arrived." Conrad moved toward the projector. Alden blocked the path with one arm. On screen, Silas wrapped his jacket around the shifted display frame, pulled one bracket loose, and cleared the jam panic bar. 3 bikers shielded the broken edge with leather while adults passed through. The same jackets had been treated as stains on the restored seats tonight. In 1984, they had become a wall against glass. The audio crackled again. Arthur ordered a staff member to clear the corridor before reporters arrived. Silas asked whether every patron had been counted. Arthur did not answer. A murmur spread among the donors, softer than applause and more dangerous to Conrad, because no one could dismiss it as excitement. Lydia's tablet lit with new messages from trustees watching the internal event feed. She glanced at the screen, then at a small green indicator beside the booth camera. "Conrad," she said, "the rehearsal stream is still live." His face drained. The Foundation's own media system was sending the projection, the witnesses, and every word spoken in the booth to board members who had planned to approve the reopening at midnight. Conrad reached for Lydia's tablet. She stepped away. On screen, the young Alden appeared in Arthur's office beside a termination form. Silas entered behind him. The film's audio weakened, but one sentence remained clear. "Put the door on me. The projectionist stays." Slate closed his eyes. The 7 old riders in front did not move. Alden's hand slipped against the projector housing as the words returned from the past with the smell of Margaret's hospital soap and the memory of bills stacked beside their kitchen stove. Conrad recognized the office sequence as it appeared on the screen. Arthur taking the prepared statement, Silas signing it, and the cameraman keeping the lens trained on them. "That is enough." Conrad pushed past Alden and reached for the red cutoff switch. The reel clattered faster. A glass marker fell from the shelf and shattered beneath Alden's shoes. At 11:47 p.m., Conrad placed his fingers around the switch and spoke directly into the sound of the projector. "Stop that machine if you still want your retirement supplement." Alden slid his palm across the switch plate before Conrad could reach it. The projector kept running, the old reel rattling through the gate while broken glass glittered beneath their shoes and the smell of heated acetate thickened the booth. Conrad stopped inches from Alden's hand. Alden never touched him. Conrad remained beside the switch. No one in the auditorium rushed the stairs, no leather-clad rider moved toward the booth, and no voice rose above the turning gears. Slate left his seat alone. He walked down the center aisle beneath gold ceiling panels and crystal lights, carrying a flat black case against his side. Mud marked each step across the carpet Lydia had spent weeks protecting. The marks looked small beneath the enormous screen. They looked permanent. At 11:48 p.m., Slate stopped at the edge of the stage and opened the case. He placed 3 document packets on the stage lectern beneath the pale spill of light from the screen. The first is Eleanor Fenwick's custody record, he said. It gives Alden authority to preserve and inspect the reel until its origin is formally reviewed. Conrad leaned over the booth window. Inspection is not public exhibition. Slate opened the second packet. The restoration grant defines historically connected witnesses, trustees, and custodians as an authorized review body when new provenance evidence is discovered. 7 elderly writers in the front row remained seated beneath the screen. Lydia looked at the foundation seal printed across the top page. She knew the clause. She had used it in fundraising materials. Slate placed down the third packet. At 10:40 tonight, 7 sworn statements, a formal preservation demand, and a carbon copy of Eleanor Fenwick's custody memorandum were delivered to Foundation Council, the State Preservation Trust, and 2 principal donors. Conrad's fingers loosened around the switch. You copied property that was not yours. We preserved the record before anyone could bury it again. You came here to threaten this foundation. Slate shook his head. We came here so one old man would not have to stand alone when you threatened him. The theater held still. Outside, ice scraped across the marquee. Inside, chandelier light warmed marble walls built around a lie while cold rainwater dried in dark patches across 100 leather jackets. Lydia's tablet vibrated again. 4 trustees had joined the live feed. Then 6. The camera inside the projection booth continued recording Conrad beside the cutoff switch, Alden near the shaking reel, and the unsigned retirement supplement agreement lying open on the workbench. The stream cannot be stopped from here, Lydia said. Conrad turned toward her. End it. The board activated archive capture when the historical footage appeared. Then call them. They're already watching. On screen, Silas stood inside Arthur Fenwick's office, rain dripping from his vest onto a patterned rug. Arthur pushed the prepared statement across the desk. The young Alden reached for it, but Silas moved first. The door was mine, he said through the damaged soundtrack. The cable was mine. The projectionist stays. Arthur asked what Silas wanted in exchange. Silas looked toward the camera. Nothing. Conrad's face tightened as if that word had struck him harder than any accusation. He could bargain with a retirement supplement, a grant, a plaque, or a family name. Nothing left him no price to offer. Slate looked up toward the booth. You can cut the power, Slate said. You cannot erase what this room has already seen. Conrad looked down at the rows of scarred men who had entered without tickets, sat without complaint, and produced documents instead of demands. He looked at the donors holding silent glasses. He looked at Lydia, whose own camera had become the clearest witness in the building. His hand left the switch. Alden returned both hands to the projector. The reel continued. Silas signed the statement, slid the pen back to Arthur, and walked toward the corridor one final time. He checked the east exit. He counted the empty hall. Then he turned toward the young projectionist and placed a paper ticket in his palm. In the center row, Slate rose. The 7 men from 1984 stood next, slowly, one gripping his cane and another steadying himself against the velvet seat. Then the row behind them rose. Then another. Leather creaked beneath the gold ceiling as 100 bikers came to their feet without applause, without raised fists, and without a single word. Their shadows stretched across red carpet and polished brass, while Silas remained frozen on the screen, his face pale with film grain, his name absent from every plaque in the building. Alden watched through the booth glass as the last writer stood. Conrad remained alone beside the red switch. The film reached its final frames, burned white at the edges, and filled the restored theater with a light no one could purchase, rename, or return to the dark. The projector slowed at 11:53 p.m., its final loop clicking through the gate while 100 bikers remained standing beneath the gold ceiling. No one applauded, no one demanded an apology, and no one moved toward Conrad. Their silence had already done more than anger could have done. It left him alone beside the red cut-off switch, visible to the trustees watching the archive stream, surrounded by the evidence he could no longer control. Lydia's tablet rang first. The Foundation chair instructed her to preserve the broadcast, secure the original reel, and suspend Conrad's authority over the archive until an emergency review could be completed. A second call came from a preservation trust. A third came from the principal donor, whose grant required immediate disclosure of historically significant material. Conrad tried to argue that the screening had been unauthorized. Slate did not answer him. He simply pointed to Eleanor Fenwick's custody record, the grant clause, and the delivery confirmations stamped 10:40 p.m. The legal path had closed behind Conrad before he ever touched the switch. If he seized the reel, the board still held the archive stream. If he stopped the stream, the preservation demand and 7 sworn statements remained. If he punished Alden, the recorded threat against the retirement supplement remained. Conrad had not been cornered by motorcycles or force. He had been cornered by his own words. At 12:07 a.m., following the Foundation chair's instruction, Conrad removed his badge and placed it on the projection bench. The gesture was small, almost neat. It sounded louder than the shattered glass beneath Alden's shoes. At 5:20 on the morning after the screening, the freezing rain softened into pale snow. The bikers left without interviews, photographs, or speeches, their engines starting one by one beneath the marquee before fading along the clearing street. Alden returned to the auditorium to switch off the aisle lamps and found a single object on Slate's seat: Silas's yellowed ticket stub, still protected inside its clear sleeve. On the back, beneath Alden's faded name, Slate had added 8 words in pencil. He knew you would turn on the light. Alden carried the ticket upstairs and placed it inside his shirt pocket, close to his heart rather than inside any public display. He had spent 42 years believing silence was the price of the life Silas had protected for him. Now he understood that Silas had never purchased his silence. He had protected Alden's right to choose courage when the time finally came. Before leaving the booth, Alden rested his palm against the cooling projector and looked through the square window one last time. The velvet seats were empty, dried boot prints crossed the marble lobby, and Arthur's bronze plaque still shone beneath its private spotlight. But Alden no longer believed it would survive the day. 3 weeks later, workers removed the plaque from the lobby wall. They offered to fill the 4 screw holes, but Alden asked that they remain visible beside a new glass display case. Inside rested the dented silver film can, the red words "Never Show Still Untouched," a restored strip of 16mm film showing Silas turning toward the empty corridor, and Alden's folded white projection gloves. The corrected record named Silas Pembroke, the 7 riders, Alden Pike, and the theater workers who had guided 212 adults to safety. It called none of them a legend. It simply described what each person had done. Alden's base pension had never been legally at risk. The board ordered the $28,400 completion supplement paid in full, and his medical coverage extended as promised. Lydia retained her position after preserving the complete internal recording and publicly correcting the Foundation archive. Conrad lost control of the theater, its records, and the family naming rights attached to the restoration grant. On the display's first morning, Alden returned alone, touched the yellowed ticket inside his pocket, and watched sunlight fall across the 4 empty holes. For the first time in 42 years, the wall told the truth by showing what had been removed. Alden turned away from the light without lowering his head. This time, the darkness carried no debt. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.